Welcome to the Are You GCSE Physics Ready playlist. This playlist is packed with example questions and guided solutions for every GCSE Physics topic. So it's the perfect tool to help you test your understanding. If you feel like you might need a quick review of this topic before having a go at the questions, or you would just like the ideal revision companion for these videos, then do make sure to download my free GCSE Physics revision notes, linked in the description below. If you're ready, let's dive in. Okay, so these questions are all about choosing appropriate energy resources. So, Joe is buying a house in Spain. His friend Harry claims that Joe should install solar panels to power his home exclusively. Discuss the benefits and disadvantages of installing them. Okay, so let's start with the benefits. So a particular benefit of your solar panels is that there is minimal running costs. In fact, when it is sunny outside, you are going to get effectively free electricity. Okay, and since we've been told in the question that this house is in Spain, it's quite likely to be sunny a lot of the time. And also they are quite environmentally friendly because whilst they are running, they do not emit any greenhouse gases. Okay, however, the disadvantages are first the installation cost. So even though it doesn't cost very much when they are up and running, actually installing the solar panels on your roof in the first place does cost quite a bit of money. So you have to weigh up the cost benefit there. And also in this claim that he could power his home exclusively using them, only if he didn't want to use his electricity at night time, because of course when it's night and there's no sun in the sky, then you can't use your solar panels for electricity at that time. Finally, you might think that solar panels are unsightly, depending on your taste. Okay, the next question is a new nuclear power plant is being commissioned and the locals are protesting. Outline the benefits to the local residents who would prefer a wind farm in their area rather than a nuclear power plant. Okay, so for nuclear, our two main benefits really are when it's up and running, the power is relatively cheap and it is extremely reliable. You might also want to outline to the local residents that in fact nuclear power is actually quite safe, okay, because there's this perception or public perception that nuclear power is super dangerous because of the disasters in places like Chernobyl or Fukushima, but however those disasters are really quite rare, so you might want to outline that to the residents. The other thing is it doesn't take up much land mass to actually build a nuclear power plant, okay, especially not when you're considering the amount of energy that you are going to get from this nuclear power plant. And it can really deal with any type of demand because you can run a nuclear power plant all day and all night. So then, after outlining that, you might want to explain why wind doesn't actually have some of those benefits that the nuclear power has. So, for example, in order to have the same amount of energy as a nuclear power plant, you would need to use an extremely large area of land, okay, which might not be favourable for the local residents. And of course, you need wind. So on a day when it isn't a particularly windy day, you would actually have to forgo any of your electricity supply because there wouldn't be any electricity being produced by the wind turbines. And finally, you could argue that the wind turbines are also unsightly, and since there will need to be so many of them, that could be a real spoiler for the view for local residents. Okay, explain how hydroelectric dams can be used to generate electricity and suggest why they are advantageous over other forms of renewable energy to deal with surges in demand. So, okay, so hydroelectric dams work on the fact that you have this dam which traps a load of water behind it and you let that water out, okay, at a constant rate. The water then being let out of the dam goes through a turbine, which turns the turbine, which then turns the generator, and that's what produces the electricity. And the reason that your hydroelectric dams may be preferable to other forms of renewable energy are basically they can meet surges in demand, because you can let the water out at whatever rate you need or require, and you can save the water so that when the demand surges, you can actually start letting more water out at that point. So they sound super beneficial. Obviously, with hydroelectric dams, you have to think about the fact that they're very expensive to build, and also they flood areas in order to have these dams there, so you get this loss of habitats as well. Okay, now let's look at some questions that might ask you about trends or data, so using graphs for these different energy resources. So we have a graph here of power and demand in hours of the day and the different seasons. So we're asked to use the graph to explain why solar or wind power is not sufficient during the evening. So that's the first question, and you can see here during the evenings from about 6 p.m, so that 1800 hour of the day to 24. So that's your evening. You have this large amount of power that needs to be supplied, okay, or a large demand for power. And you can argue two things. Firstly, solar panels aren't going to cut it because there's no sun in the evening, so it's not going to be able to deal with that demand and power. And for your wind, well, it depends. It depends if it's going to be super windy at night or not. Will it be able to cope with that extra demand? Possibly not on some occasions. Okay, so just why the graph shows the trend that it shows. So you can see that there are kind of two peaks in this data. There's that 6 to 10 peak, and then that peak we've just spoken about from 6 at night to midnight. And so that's because people are in their houses at that time. It's either the morning or after work, and they are using all of the heating and electric in that time. Okay, so that's why you get this curve like this. And you can see that the flattest part of the line there is those early hours of the morning where people are asleep, not using really much electricity, and possibly have turned off their heating for the middle of the night. Okay, now we've been given this pie chart, and we need to find the percentage of energy resources that are fossil fuels. Okay, so first we need to know what our fossil fuels are, and those are oil, natural gas and coal. So to find the total percentage that's fossil fuels in this pie chart, I just add all those percentages together, and that gives me 86.7. Then it asks me for all the total non-renewable. So for that, I basically need to know and appreciate that nuclear is also non-renewable, but hydropower is renewable. So all I have to do is take my fossil fuels percentage, add on the nuclear, and that gives me 91.1%.
Just before we go into the tips and tricks section, if you do want some extra advice to getting that grade 9 for your GCSE, then why not download my free 20-minute exam success guide? Just click on the link in the description below. I'm going to give away all of my best advice and secrets, and completely for free, so why not?
Okay, my tips and tricks for this section basically consist of how to structure some of your longer answers. So you can do it two ways. You can do it by taking your way through the advantages first of a particular type of power and then the disadvantages, or by going through the different categories that you might want to think about when deciding on an energy resource. So I put econ, social and environmental, and basically you can use that as a little checklist at the end of one of these questions. Have you mentioned all three of those categories? So have you mentioned money to install whatever resource you're talking about and then to run the resource you're talking about? Have you mentioned something social, something about maybe spoiling the view, or something about it being noisy, or perhaps even safety concerns? And then have you mentioned the environment? So have you talked about any losses of habitats and any greenhouse gases that are or are not released? The final bit there, the secret extra category, is any kinds of practicalities for that particular energy resource. So for example, your area that you're having the resource in is important, so there are certain restrictions for your wind turbines. If it's not a windy area, it's not a particularly suitable resource. Okay, so you might want to also discuss those.